We all know the phrase, you are what you eat. But do you ever think about the phrase, you are what you do? Performance isn't just for acting for an audience, it defines our identities. To quote the Greek philosopher Aristotle, we are what we repeatedly do. This basically sums up the idea defined in the textbook as our identities are the result of our repeated and patterned human actions. Because our actions define who we are, our identities are ever-changing and evolving, which means that as individuals we are capable of change and growth. Performance, or the repeated human actions, are influenced by two main things: the environment in which we are raised and our gender. Judith Butler, the author of Gender Trouble, stated that the construction of gendered activity and identity is achieved through the stylized repetition of acts. For example, we are typically born as a male or a female, but we act or talk and behave in a certain way based on what society expects of us and of our gender. We are repeatedly told what we can and cannot do based on our physiological identity, which in turn causes these actions that we perform to be so ingrained in us that they form the base of our identity and who we become in the process. The rituals and social norms that we grow up in dictate our performance, and hence performance is a response to the privilege of norms, rules, and ideals notions of competence. In the article The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Goffman defined performance broadly as any public activity that influences other people. And since we influence other people through our performance, our actions define who we are. We will now see how our performance affects our identity by looking at actions in situations involving entertainment like dance, our workplace, school, family, and friends.
What are you doing now? Probably you're sitting listening to me. Maybe you're reading the book, Introduction to Performance Studies. Maybe you have an urge to get up and have a cup of coffee or take a walk. Can these things be performances? From my point of view, they can be. Anything can be a performance. You have to treat it as a performance by applying to it certain criteria that work with performances, such as what is the behavior, what is its sequence, how is it generated, how is it evaluated, what costumes do people wear, or clothes for that matter, where does the behavior take place, in what circumstances, what physical environment. In other words, there's always performance questions that can be asked of any behavior. So the answer to the question, what is performance, is not so much separating out a genre to say, like, ballet is a performance, but walking into your dining room is not a performance, but looking at each of these behaviors in a specific kind of way. So you can examine ballet from a non-performative point of view, simply as a sociological phenomenon, as a history of the relationship between a certain art form and its political sources in 17th and 18th century France, for example. And you can analyze just eating dinner as a performance, how people comport themselves, how they behave in relationship to each other during the staging of a dinner. Erving Goffman, whose work is very important to performance studies, wrote about the performances of everyday life. So he brought that into the purview of performance. The study of aesthetic performances, such as dance, theater, and music, has long been accepted as something special, a kind of refraction, reflection, imitation of ordinary reality. But I would go beyond that and say that art also creates its own reality and actively interacts with social life.
One example of performance is performing at a workplace. When you're performing at a workplace, it is a different atmosphere. You must perform at a more professional level. You're surrounded by your coworkers, your superiors, and you want to maintain that professional look so you can keep moving forward with the company. In the workplace, there are many rituals that you perform routinely, such as verbal and nonverbal communications. Some nonverbal gestures can be eye contact. It shows that you're listening and you're paying attention to all the details being put forth in the conversation. Another one is your posture. When you show up to work and you're sitting up straight, not slouching, it shows that you're there to work and not to mope around all day. A very important one is time. Being on time to meetings and to work conveys a message of professionalism. Some examples of some verbal communications can be as simple as speaking in the appropriate settings, explaining something to other coworkers, or if you're speaking in a meeting, you're speaking clearly enough for everyone to understand. Other verbal communications can be just generally speaking. You must watch what you say while at the workplace, because anything you say can be taken the wrong way and it will be looked at negatively. And you don't want that to carry over to the wrong person and put you in bad situations. With talking, you must talk in a more conservative way. Using slang or words that are offensive are not acceptable at the workplace. So verbally speaking, you must be careful in what you say in many different situations. Behavior at the workplace must be kept professional. You're not going to wear sweats and a t-shirt to work daily. You want to carry yourself in a more professional persona. Your performance will consistently build to who you will be at your workplace. With these consistent work habits, you will build your identity and it will be molded into a more professional type of employee that you want to portray.
Work is not the only place that people perform. Another area of performance in people's lives is school. School is one of the hardest areas for people who aren't used to performing to perform. That is because in the United States, public speaking is the nation's #1 phobia. Things that can be done to help overcome this phobia is taking a class or by relying on identities. Identities are how you act or change your personality based on your social surroundings. Identity plays a big role in performance because it changes. Who's watching you and where are both big factors in your identities. So in conclusion, we have learned about identities and how they affect your performance at school. This doesn't mean that you can blame your social surroundings for a failed performance. You have to take into account how much practice you put into your performance and your view on the subject. Another thing is how much preparation you put into your performance. Thanks.
Alright guys, we'll be wrapping up our presentation today by speaking about performativity. Performativity is a word that doesn't appear in any of the dictionary references I've attempted to look it up in, but it is a word commonly used in academic circles. In order to understand performativity, we must understand what these academics mean when they say it. The textbook for this class, Communication, A Critical Cultural Approach, offers perhaps the most clear example that I have come across as to what exactly a performative is. The authors mention a wedding ceremony and the phrase, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," as a good example of a performative. The phrase does not simply describe the marriage or the bond formed between the two people, it actually creates the bond. The phrase is binding in both a legal and societal sense, as opposed to a statement of fact, such as the phrase, "My soup is warm." The statement alone does not make your soup warm, it merely describes what your soup already was. In the case of a marriage, the performative phrase, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," actually creates the union between two people. Now that we've looked at what a performative is, we can begin to understand what the idea of performativity actually entails. Judith Butler described performativity as the ways language acts, instead of just representing or describing actions. In a more general academic sense, it is not just language included in performativity's scope, but also gestures and appearances. Performativity is not the idea that our internal identity is what leads us to say certain things or make certain gestures. It is the idea that the little things we say and do in everyday life, the performative actions that we make, continually builds upon our internal identity structure. So, today we have looked at how performance and identity affect one another, as well as the different ways that we perform in our everyday lives. We explored performance in the context of a workplace. We looked at how we perform in academic situations, such as classes. We saw how we perform around our friends and the different relationships we build every day. We experienced a very literal definition of performance in a dance performance, and we looked at how performativity and our identities are related. Thank you.